Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, July 9th. It's not July 9th. Today is Tuesday, July 11th. I know what day it is. And today is day 249 since October 7th. I was working on a chapter today for a book that I'm co-writing with a former colleague on decolonizing holy sites, and we had included a death toll from just 3 days ago of how many deaths in Gaza. June 6th was the date. And I was making edits and I thought, well, I'll update this number. And the number of deaths on June 6th was 36,585. And the number of deaths that were reported by OSHA, their most recent numbers are through June 9th, is 37,084, more than 37,000 people killed in Gaza. And the numbers that were reported for today, July 11th, so the numbers are typically a day or so old, 37,164 people. And I don't have words. And I keep thinking that the numbers, may they never just be numbers to us, and may we never lose heart, but continue to call for a comprehensive ceasefire until we're blue in the face. Just in 3 days, 500 people killed. So I wanted to give you an update on what's happened. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'll give an update on what's happened in the last day or so. The United Nations is publishing a report this week. I mentioned previously that Israel is now being named on the list of countries that have like the worst treatment of children, but this report says that there are more grave violations against children committed in Gaza, West Bank, and Israel than in anywhere else in the world over the past year. It's a report on children in armed conflict, and they verified more cases of war crimes against children in the occupied territories in Israel. More war crimes than the Democratic Republic of Congo, than Myanmar, than in Somalia, than in Nigeria, and then in Sudan. And as I go through these things, I always think, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. The UN put out an article highlighting how the death toll in the West Bank has now surpassed more than 500 people. You guys must think I just cry all the time, but I think it's important that we be embodied in our work. And so I'm sorry that I'm a wreck, but the UN put out an article highlighting how the death toll in the West Bank is more than 500 people killed since October 7th. There were two of the latest fatalities were teenagers, a 16-year-old Ahmad Ashraf Hamdat and 17-year-old Mohammed Musa Albatar. They were each shot at a distance of about 70 meters while running away after throwing stones and or Molotov cocktails towards an Israeli military post outside of a settlement. There's footage on CCTV that shows the youngsters' deaths along with the killings of 4 more Palestinians by the Israeli army on Monday. So the death toll was 505 in the West Bank since October 7th. In the same period, 24 Israelis, including 8 who were Israeli security force members, were killed in the West Bank and Israel in clashes or alleged attacks by Palestinians from the West Bank. And UNRWA also provided an update, and I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about the West Bank because things there are so terrible. Between the 3rd and 9th of June, there were 161 recorded Israeli security forces search and arrest operations. So one of the reasons why there have been so many more deaths is there have been so many more of these incursions by the military. The Israeli security forces, they've detained 225 Palestinians, including refugees, during that period. In that same period, 11 Palestinians have been killed. So in 6 days, 11 Palestinians killed in the West Bank. some near Jenin. There actually was a helicopter opened fire in the West Bank, and a rocket was launched at a house by the Israeli security forces in some of these operations in the West Bank. Israeli settler violence against Palestinians has been high, with an escalation over the 7th through 9th of June. Palestinians and their property were attacked in Burqa in northern West Bank. At least 2 houses were subject to arson, several cars were burnt, and Masafra Yatta, which is in the South Hebron Hills, settlers uprooted olive trees and stole agricultural equipment. Secretary Blinken has been in Israel, and he met with the families of 8 American Israeli hostages during his trip and talked about the importance of continued pressure upon Hamas to accept the ceasefire negotiations. He also thanked King Abdullah of Jordan for support of the ceasefire hostage deal and facilitating aid into Gaza. According to Qatari and Egyptian sources, there has been no formal response from Hamas or from Israel over the UN-backed ceasefire proposal, but there's been an apparent willingness to at least consider the deal on both sides, but there's no real news in that regard. The United States has said it would provide an additional $404 million in humanitarian aid in support to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And that would bring the total U.S. assistance to more than $674 million over the past 8 months. That number might sound like a huge number. It's actually very meager when you look at the billions of dollars that we support in military aid to Israel. One of the hostages that was rescued previously on Saturday, Noah Argamani, was released from the hospital or discharged from the medical center, and it has returned home. Hundreds of parents whose children serve as combat soldiers in the Israeli military addressed the defense minister Gallant and the IDF chief in an open letter and criticized the Knesset's decision to approve the law that would exempt ultra-Orthodox men from serving in the military. And they wrote that they no longer support the fighting in Gaza. Division 98 has completed a mission. So this is a division of the military. They've completed a mission in Deir al-Balah and Brej, which included Saturday's rescue mission. This is a report from Haaretz. And so according to a spokesperson, they finished those operations. There was a conference just held by Jordan that will raise funds for humanitarian aid in Gaza that just took place yesterday. And Secretary Blinken met with Benny Gantz and Lapid in Israel. So he's continued to have diplomatic meetings. And according to reports in Lebanon, the IDF struck villages in southern Lebanon. The Washington Post has called the war on the northern border of Israel the slow war that is beginning right before our eyes. I already talked about the additional aid that the U.S. will provide. The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan insisted that Hamas cannot remain in power in Gaza following the war, and he has said that President Biden has been explicit and clear despite being critiqued heavily for inconsistency on that point. The Wall Street Journal did quote Sinwar, the Hamas leader, as having said that civilians being killed in Gaza are necessary sacrifices. Israeli Defense Minister Gallant said that the army drafting should come from all strata of the public, and that we need everyone in order to defend ourselves in this country. And Israeli forces entered the West Bank village of Dan, which is near Jenin, and killed 3 armed Palestinians. The UN has said that Israeli forces and Palestinian armed groups have both committed war crimes in the deadly hostage rescue that happened on Saturday. They have said that at least 274 Palestinians were killed directly as a part of that operation, including dozens of women and children. The Office of the UN said that Palestinian armed groups were holding hostages in densely populated areas, which put civilians at added risk. And the UN officials said all of these actions by both parties may amount to war crimes. It was catastrophic the way that this was carried out, where civilians were caught smack bang in the middle of all of this. The fact that 4 hostages are now free is clearly good news. The hostages should never have been taken in the first place, but this is all a breach of international humanitarian law. Hostages must be freed, all of them, promptly. And Churches for Middle East Peace has been calling for the release of the hostages and the release of Palestinian prisoners who've been held so unjustly and have been treated. I don't know if you've seen pictures of the ways that Palestinian prisoners have been losing weight because of the treatment of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails and prisons. But that has been a huge issue over the past 8 months. And so we will continue in our efforts. And, I just would say pray for a tipping point and that tides would turn quickly because, what I heard when I was on the ground in Israel just a few weeks ago and what I heard consistently throughout the Middle East is that the goal is for the war to be drug on through the US elections in November. And I don't know that the vast majority of people in Gaza can last that long. Reverend Dr. Munther Itzhak is with us here in Washington, D.C. these few days. Churches for Middle East Peace and other groups, Telas and others are hosting him for meetings and events. There's a public prayer vigil tonight. He will be in the United States for the next several days, and there'll be some online events as well. And I just wanted to remind us of a quote that he said at Christmas time during his Christ in the Rebel sermon. He said, "I want you to look in the mirror and ask, where was I when Gaza was going through a genocide?" And so might we keep that in mind as we continue in our ongoing efforts, calling for a ceasefire and working towards peace.